Hello everybody, welcome to today's Bio 17 lecture on communication, which I find very interesting because I need to communicate today in a different format than I'm used to doing. But I'm ready. I've been teaching Bio 1 online for 20 years now, and I'm prepared to make this happen as best as we can in these very unusual times. In a lot of ways, we're very lucky that the technology allows us to pull this kind of thing off. So let's get started. Let's jump over to the PowerPoint. You might want to follow along and you can sort of take notes as we go, and we'll go from there. So let's go over to this screen here, and I'll bounce back and forth probably as we go. We'll see. Okay, so we'll start with our lecture today now on communication. And first of all, when we talk about communication and animal behavior, we're talking about how one animal, whether intentionally or unintentionally, sends what we call a signal from one animal. So there's my signal. I don't write very well anyway, and now I'm writing on my tablet, which I'd like to blame the tablet, but you know, that's just how it is. So you're getting the authentic me, I think, which is good. So there you go. So anyway, when one animal sends a signal to another animal, intentionally or unintentionally, to a receiver. And we'll talk about the different examples, different ways the sensory mechanisms for that communication can happen for each of these as we go. Visual, auditory, tactile, olfactory, and I think we'll skip electrical. So we'll start with visual first. So first we'll talk about visual communication, and we'll start with this animal here. Okay, and I want you to take a look at the picture and maybe try to guess what that animal is and maybe what information it's sending. I'll give you a second, but maybe as you go with your notes, try to think about these things and write them down and practice. So give you a second to think about that, but it's good practice to sort of keep your mind active instead of just sitting there while we do it. And think about what's being communicated in this example. Now, hopefully you had a second there. So I'll tell you now that this happens to be, if you didn't know, a male mallard duck. And what we find is that many animals, particularly you see this in birds and particularly in ducks, but you'll see these males that have these very bright colors, and then the females are sort of this brown, sort of drab color, and the males are brightly colored. And there are different hypotheses that explain that, but one that has been tested several times and sort of shown to be true is that what the males are demonstrating in this kind of communication, probably unintentionally, I guess, but they're showing, the males are showing the females their fitness. The bright colors, it turns out, are measures of how many parasites that they have on them, and then that is in turn a function of how good their immune system is, and that then is a measure somewhat of how their genetics are working. And Professor Sarah Scott's former grad advisor, Marlene Zuck, or Zook, not sure how you pronounce it, is actually world famous for this kind of research on birds, male birds with these bright colors, and has produced many well-cited studies in the field of animal behavior. Now, let's look down here and take a look at this animal. Ooh, there we go. And let's try to think about what you might think that is and give yourself a chance to think about it and what the bright blue colors are on this frog and what it might be communicating in this particular case. So, give you a second there. What this frog is showing is what we call aposomatic coloration. And aposematic coloration are warning colors that animals produce that relay information about how dangerous they might be. So it turns out in this particular case, this is called a poison arrow frog or a poison dart frog. There are many different colors of them found in tropical regions of South America and probably elsewhere. But they're very, very toxic, and animals that eat these will likely get very sick and die. There's one even, supposedly, if I remember correctly, that even holding it, if you were a person, the toxins are so strong and they're able to go through your skin that you can get very sick and die just by holding it. And so they're advertising, in this sense, some danger that they have, which is the toxins they build up, which I believe they get by eating these toxic centipedes, if I remember correctly. Anyway, that's called aposematic coloration. And then if you look up here, this is kind of a funny picture of what they've done here. This is a skunk, obviously, and it's walking on its hands, and they have a person walking on their hands to try to show you the two things going side by side. But the skunk, as everybody knows, skunks spray, and they're also an example of aposematic coloration because they have these very bright, not bright, but very contrasting black and white colors. So you see that a lot in nature, that those are sort of a universal kind of thing that animals learn, that bright contrasting colors are a sign of danger or toxin or some ability the animal has to defend itself. So you probably know that skunks can spray you, but you may not have known that skunks will often do these behaviors where they'll either bounce or they'll stand on their front legs. And those are all sort of warnings of what's coming next, which if you mess with the skunk, you get sprayed. And down here, if you're around dogs a lot or you know much about dogs, you probably very quickly recognize this behavior. Although this is a pretty large dog, this dog's behavior and what it's doing now would probably suggest that you're going to be safe. You're not in trouble. This dog's not trying to attack you. This behavior is what we often call a play bow. Got to find where my pin is. A play bow. And play bow behavior in dogs like this signal that and it's a visual signal that everything that's coming after this behavior are meant to be interpreted as play. So although the dog might bark and run around and jump and do things that normally would seem threatening, the play bow behavior coming first is supposed to be a signal that the other behaviors are meant to be playful after that, to humans and to other dogs. And then another thing that's another kind of visual display signal that is very interesting is that of these beetles, actually called fireflies. And there are many different species of them, and they're called fireflies, or also called lightning bugs. And each species sort of has its own different sort of flash that it uses to attract mates. And that in itself is kind of neat. They use this kind of signal communication of this flashing bioluminescent light. But one group of fireflies that we call it's in the genus, it's a whole genus of them called Forturis. They do a regular signal that attracts mates. But then the females will also are able to mimic another species display. They'll flash, but they'll attract a different species in which they eat it as a energy source. And we call that aggressive mimicry. Mimicry is where one animal acts like something else. So aggressive mimicry. And we call these particular females, they call them the femme fatales, which I don't know if that's French, or it seems very French to me, but basically it means fatal females. Probably true in many different languages. So anyway, those are our lightning bugs there, which are kind of neat in and of themselves. So next one we'll talk about then is, next group is auditory sound. And there are many different ways auditory sound can be used and produced by animals for communication. The first is that of a vibrating or drum-like membrane like you find in this animal here called a cicada, which is a medium to kind of large size insect, not terribly big. Maybe there's different species of them. I'm sure some are bigger than others, but I'm going to guess something around the order of, maybe 1 inch or smaller in that range, or maybe around 2 centimeters. So not very big, but they have this drum-like membrane on the side of their body, and by vibrating that membrane, they can produce this loud sound. And these are called cicadas. And many people confuse these for rattlesnakes. When I'm out in the field with students, they'll hear these cicadas from far away, and they'll think it's a rattlesnake. But rattlesnakes aren't that loud, at least in my experience, and they don't do that for hours on end. Rattlesnakes do it for a few seconds, it seems, and that's the end of it. But these are doing it from a long way away for a long period of time. I'll put some sound up so you can hear that. But anyway, that's one use of sound. The other is what's called stridulation or stridulation. Stridulating. The other one is called stridulating, and that is when you have a file or you have a file and a scraper type of thing. You're rubbing two rough surfaces together to make a sound, and the friction between those two structures produces vibration and produces sound. And animals such as crickets and grasshoppers use this mechanism by rubbing their hind legs against their side of their body. And again, Professor Sarah Scott, that's one of her sort of specialties in that. And surprisingly, a lot of people, maybe not surprising, I don't know, but a lot of people in animal behavior do study crickets. It's a kind of famous animal in the field. The third is when you have a air flow that vibrates, it goes over a vibrating membrane. And this is how we as humans produce sound using our larynx and our vocal cords. So we have these vocal cords in our larynx, and by changing the shape of them, we can produce different sounds as we blow air out. That's how I'm communicating with you today, in fact, if you think about it. And there are a lot of good examples of that. One of the most famous ones is that of howler monkeys that can produce this very loud sound, considered one of the loudest animals on Earth in terms of how far they can project that sound. Okay, and then the last is when an animal hits a substrate of some sort. So beavers, for example, will slap their tail, which can be both auditory and visual because you can see it, and they use this in different ways to perhaps warn other beavers of a potential danger. They use it in a type of play-like behavior as well. So there are probably many reasons they do that. Normally, that would be a good essay question, but I don't know what we're going to do right now with essay questions. So I'm sticking to my normal lectures, and then we'll inform you as we move what we think we're going to do as we move forward on that. The next thing, when you talk about sounds, you can talk about sound quality. And sound travels in the form of these energy waves. And depending on how the sound is traveling, whether it's going through air or water, animals utilize these sounds in different ways. And they kind of fall into three groups: infrasonic sound, normal hearing, which is us, and then ultrasonic sound. And when you talk about sound, there are sort of two qualities that you can consider. One is the frequency, which is the pitch, which is the wavelength that the sound travels. So a pitch where the wavelength is one distance, a low pitch, for example, has a longer distance, and a high pitch frequency has a shorter distance between the waves. But then there's also amplitude, which is how big that wave goes. That's really more perceived with loudness or how loud it is. So if you hear my voice right now, it has a certain particular pitch, but if I were to yell into the microphone, the pitch might be the same, but the amplitude would increase, sort of. I think I could be, you know, that's about right, I think. Okay. So anyway, you know, because when I yell, maybe I do change the pitch as well. I'm not sure, but ideally, if I could do it right, I could increase the amplitude and keep the pitch the same. And likewise, I could change the pitch by going higher up in my voice. I don't have a very good high range in my voice, but I could go very low and I can go very high. And both of those would be me changing the pitch without maybe me changing the amplitude. Okay. So anyway, we use those in different ways. Animals such as elephants and whales, for example, use what we call infrasonic sound, which is very low frequency sound. And this can travel through water over very, very long distances for communication. There's not a lot, I think, we know about this type of communication. We're always learning more, it seems, about that. Particularly, well, elephants are totally neat and mysterious anyway, but whales are very hard for us to research, being in the environment, being in a very different environment than we're used to. So I suspect that a lot of that we still don't quite know. And then humans utilize sound that we call within the normal range of 20 to 2000 hertz. And then bats, I think Professor Scott mentioned this already, but bats use ultrasonic sound, which is a very high frequency, 100, 200 kilohertz. Notice the K there. So when I initially, every time I look at this at first, I think these overlap, but they don't. Notice that's kilohertz. It's much, much higher than normal hearing. So they produce this sound and it bounces off an object and they listen to it and pick that up. Okay. Here's the howler monkey and here's the bat showing the infrasonic sound and sort of some of the ways that they can utilize that auditory sound. The howler monkey, found in Costa Rica and elsewhere, Central and South America, has a sound range within the normal range of human hearing, so you can hear it. And the bat has ultrasonic sounds, which are generally outside of the range of hearing, is very high frequency. All right, the next sort of form of communication would be that of what we call tactile, touching, and that kind of thing. And there are a lot of good examples of that. I'll just give you one here that animals use, but there are many. And kind of one of the really neat ones in animal behavior that you have to learn because it's just so cool is the communication that honeybees use to demonstrate where food is. So they communicate using this tactile information to other honeybees. And if the food source is close, they use what's called the round dance. And in the round dance, the honeybees go back and they do this dance where they go along the honeycomb of the hive, and the direction by which they perform that round dance tells the other honeybees that the food source is somewhere out there and it's less than 50 meters away is generally how they do it. Now, if the food's further, they can use another form of communication called the waggle dance. And the waggle dance conveys both distance and direction. And that's what you see down here. This honeybee is doing the waggle dance, and when they do the waggle dance, the direction tells the other bees which way to go, but the number of waggles in that dance, that vibrating waggle, tells the other bees the distance. And they've done a lot of neat studies on that, and that seems to be fairly true as well, which is neat. Okay, so that's our waggle dance. The last one I'll leave you with today of communication is that of olfactory, or the sense of smell. And a lot of animals utilize smell, and humans are one of those that's not terribly good at it. But a lot of animals use this form of sensory information mainly for finding food and prey and things of that sort. So it's a form of communication that one animal might be producing unintentionally. So as you know, for example, sharks have a very good sense of smell, as do other animals such as piranhas. So some animals can sense, they call this olfactory because the molecules of blood in this case travel and land on sensory pits on the shark or piranha's nasal receptors in that region, and that goes to the brain telling the animal that they found or can sense the molecules of blood, and they can use that to track whatever they're after hunting. So the interesting thing about the olfactory system is there's the ability to sense very, very small amounts of the molecule, which means they have a very good olfactory system for that one kind of molecule. Same is true for the male silkworm moth. This animal here is considered the animal to have the best sense of smell in the animal world, as far as we know, as we studied, because the male silkworm moth can smell the pheromones, which are molecules that female produces and sends them into the air. They can smell the pheromones from a female silkworm moth that are many, many miles away, but it's just that one molecule. So if you take, for example, an animal like a bloodhound, which is one of the animals that has the sort of widest range sense of smell and really good at low levels of molecules, they can track people. The bloodhounds are used to track missing people and things of that sort, and they can pick up a wide variety of smells and lock on to that and then track that. So olfactory is really interesting in that it's not thought of just as the animal's ability to smell, but you have to also consider the range of smell. So some animals are really good at detecting one or two or very small numbers or ranges of molecules, and others are really good at a wide range of molecules. So hope that gets us started. So we'll continue on with our next lecture coming up shortly, and I hope everyone's doing well. Talk to you later.